For most people, May 4th probably doesn't mean much more than hopefully warm weather. And if you're a fan of Star Wars, it's a good opportunity to geek out. But for students of China and Chinese history, May 4th is a pretty big deal. Welcome to China Insights, I'm Katie. China is run by an authoritarian regime, that is, the Chinese Communist Party. It's been in power since 1949 and shows no signs of wanting to reform. Marxism is still the official ideology of modern China, and the CCP continues to persecute millions of innocent people for nothing other than their political opinions and religious beliefs. You may find it hard to believe, but in fact, Chinese communism began with young people calling for science and democracy. To explain this, we need to go back about 100 years. In the early 20th century, China was in rebellion. No, not that kind of rebellion. The Qing imperial dynasty had just been overthrown, ushering in the Republic of China. But while most people who supported the Chinese Revolution expected modern government and rule of law, what they actually got was something quite different. Instead of becoming a true republic, China got divided up by a bunch of warlords, each of whom claimed to be the leader of the entire country. These problems didn't spring up overnight. China at the time was in great turmoil. For about 60 years before the Qing dynasty collapsed, it was becoming weaker and more corrupt. A massive civil war, the Taiping Rebellion, showed that the empire was coming to its end. Meanwhile, Western countries and Japan were becoming more powerful. They took Chinese territories and forced the imperial government to sign disastrous, unequal treaties. By the time the Qing dynasty finally fell, every major power except the United States owned concessions in Chinese cities or had forced China to give up land. Understandably, a lot of Chinese people were worried about the future of their country. The Qing dynasty had tried to do what Japan did, which was to learn Western technology and improve the army. But it was too little, too late. In the 1910s, young and liberal Chinese intellectuals saw disappointment after disappointment. Yuan Shikai, a powerful military general who proved instrumental in bringing down the Qing dynasty, declared himself emperor and had a popular democratic candidate assassinated. Then Yuan Shikai died, leaving a power vacuum and throwing China into a civil war. As a result, during the early days of the Chinese Republic, a growing number of scholars and activists believed that China's misfortunes were not only a matter of technological backwardness. Rather, China's very culture itself had doomed the Chinese people to misfortune. Lu Xun, a student of literature made famous for her satirical writings, wrote in a short story, The Diary of a Madman, that the whole of Chinese civilization could be summed up as 吃人, or cannibalism. In the true story of A.Q., Lu's protagonist represented what he believed to be an archetype of the typical Chinese: hypocritical, self-deceptive, and doomed to suffer repeated humiliations. Thinkers like Lu Xun, jaded by the events of recent history, attacked the traditional codes of morality and order that had governed Chinese society for thousands of years. Instead of trying to update it, they believed that China needed to reinvent itself entirely. This led to the 新文化运动, or New Culture Movement. Leading members of the New Culture Movement thought up ways to demolish Chinese culture from its foundations. Scholars and activists like Hu Shi and Chen Duxiu praised vernacular Chinese literature and denounced the ancient form of classical Chinese, which had been used for thousands of years. The linguist Qian Xuantong wrote that the Chinese script itself promoted, quote, childish, naive, and barbaric ways of thinking. Not surprisingly, he advocated the replacement of Chinese characters. Proponents of the New Culture Movement were determined to rescue China from itself, criticizing everything from Chinese clothing styles to the authenticity of classic texts. Some even claimed that the family should be abolished. Young Chinese were particularly outraged by their incompetent government. In Beijing, the capital of the Republic of China, the president had little power and had to do the bidding of whichever warlord happened to occupy the city. In World War I, China entered the conflict on the side of the Entente, declaring war on Germany and taking back Germany's colonial possessions in China. In addition, China sent over 100,000 laborers to the Western Front, where they helped dig trenches and perform other tasks. Despite all this, the European powers and America denied China a place at the Versailles Treaty negotiations, And adding insult to injury, the city of Qingdao, which China liberated from German colonial rule, was handed over to Japan. In response, on May 4, 1919, thousands of Chinese students protested in the streets. The demonstrations soon turned violent. Protesters and rioters attacked those who were suspected of having allegiance to the Japanese. The protest only ended when the military came and broke them up. Though the Chinese government boycotted the Treaty of Versailles, Japan was still awarded the territory of Qingdao. Eventually, the United States pressured Japan to give the city back to China. The May 4th protest did not achieve its goals immediately, but it had far-reaching effects. This was because the May 4th movement wasn't just about reclaiming lost Chinese territory. Its leaders were closely connected to the New Culture movement, and many of them were also the first Chinese communists. In 1921, a tiny band of the Chinese radicals gathered in Shanghai to form the Chinese Communist Party. Two figures in the CCP were Chen Duxiu and Li Dazhao. Chen Duxiu was based in Shanghai, and he had been an important leader of the New Culture movement. Li Dazhao had helped organize the May 4th protests in Beijing. He received financial aid from the newly established Soviet Union to help his cause. Of course, most people in the protests were just ordinary patriotic Chinese who wanted to see China get back on its feet. The protest leaders knew this and created powerful slogans to strengthen the movement. The English words science and democracy became important symbols of the May 4th protests. May 4th wasn't technically about communism. Also, the intellectuals and thinkers of the New Culture movement did not all share the same opinions. But this did not matter. The events of May 4th make Marxism, social Darwinism, and other left-wing ideologies popular on Chinese campuses and among the educated youth. Because of this, the CCP considers the May 4th movement as one of the main events that allowed it to successfully spread across China. The victory of communism in Russia made the ideology even more popular in China. Many people believed that the Soviet Union would create a prosperous society without class oppression. Unfortunately, the May 4th movement is often misunderstood as a time of liberalism in modern Chinese history. The 1989 Tiananmen Square protests took inspiration from May 4th, and even U.S. officials have praised the protesters' slogans of science and democracy. Apparently, they were not aware that the movements created the conditions for Chinese communism to go mainstream. Feeding off the momentum from the May 4th movement, the CCP grew rapidly. It managed to infiltrate the Chinese Nationalist Party, whose leader Sun Zhongshan is honored for his role in establishing the Republic of China. Mao Zedong, chairman of the CCP who ruled China from 1949 to his death in 1976, praised the radical writer Lu Xun as a chief general of China's Cultural Revolution. Lu's works are required reading for all Chinese students. Kids even have to memorize whole passages from his books. Many recognize the radicalism of May 4th as a critical moment for the cause of Chinese Marxism. Feng Xuerong, a Chinese scholar based in Hong Kong, summed it up like this: the May 4th movement, apart from sowing the fire seeds of violence, yielded no positive results to speak of. It didn't help save the country or leave a legacy of virtue. It was nothing more than a scene of chaos. In 1966, almost 20 years after communist takeover, Chairman Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. Millions of people became victims of violence and abuse inflicted by the fanatical Red Guards. The campaign targeted the four odes of traditional culture with a vengeance. In a sense, the radicals of the New Culture movement and May 4th got what they wanted: the destruction of traditional Chinese culture and heritage. That's it for this video. If you found it informative and would like to learn more about China and its history, please like and click the subscribe button. And of course, may the 4th be with you.